They sent others to Australia, others to the U.S., others to England, and began trying to pull from the best that was being demonstrated that they could perceive as the best. So as their form matured, and we went through finally to the third generation, it started to legitimately move into function. Because by the third turnaround of different jobs and positions and activities, those people didn't know that it was just form. They thought it was real. And so they actually learned those skills, and they acquired those skills and became legitimately what they had visioned that they would be. It was very, very powerful. Only the last 10 years have you heard much about Singapore and the Singapore Armed Forces in terms of their contribution to the world. I have a slide actually to show that. I have a paper on this. If you just write Singapore SAF, and I'll be glad to send it to you. We tie that to values and what has happened as they've shifted and changed. But that perhaps gives you a little bit more insight that they're coming from an entirely different place. Only recently, only the last year to 18 months, have they actually began contemplating and thinking about the fact that they have original material being developed in Singapore. Up until now, it has always been that is somewhere else, and they wanted to find the best, and they had the money, so they would pay for it to be brought into their regime and see what they could do, and paid multi-bucks for different people. If you have the education, they honor education, they honor publication, the visibility of that. So if you have the education, if you have the books out, okay, and if you have the reputation that goes along with that, then they're interested in what you have, and success record. They're interested in what you have to say. Positionally, too.
Alex, they also won the Asia to Mexico Award, too.
Yeah, they are number one in Asia for the MIG, and the Singapore actually got the MIG. It was the first and second year. Singapore itself received the most admired knowledge cities award for this work, for the way they go about it. But the last year, 18 months, look for changes. They are all of a sudden recognizing that they are creating new things now and beginning to put more value in their own knowledge. So this is really an interesting shift. It'd be interesting the next couple of years to see what happens. Thanks for the question.
Let's go to the view graph now. We put this up here just to show you some quick sample strategies. This is not a complete list by any means. We just sat down and wrote it out to give you some ideas. These are decision strategies. Change manager or change team decision authority. That is, create a single manager or a team, which is even better depending on the circumstances, with decision authority, though, and they must have backing from leadership. If it's not backed by leadership, it won't work, no matter what you do, most of the time. Single decision or sequencing decision, we talked about that a few minutes ago, got to decide on that strategy. Autocratic versus collaborative implementation. Again, it's easy to say, well, of course it's collaborative, and it should be in most of the cases, but not all, because there are certain specific situations which you must be very, very accurate in what you're doing. Develop a strategy and actions before decision. That is, do good homework before you get started. It's always a good way to do it, but nevertheless, that's one to think about. Is it a short-term or a long-term effort? Singapore knew it was going to take them a long term, but they were patient enough. They didn't mind 8 to 10 years. They wanted it to happen. If you do it quickly, it may not happen for a lot of reasons.
And the first capacity they built in, excellent example, was change. The capacity to change had to be there. And so they started focusing on the capacity to change before they even knew what they were going to change to.
Change organizational culture first, and then start doing it. Culture is usually one of the biggest barriers to any significant change in an organization, because that's what people are comfortable with. It's there for reasons from the past, and therefore they don't want to change that because it puts fear in the future for them. Will I have a job? Will I be doing what I like, et cetera, et cetera? So
we define culture as the way work gets done in a very short definition, okay? So that's what's really the way things are working.
It's one thing to redirect and focus, and it's another to change the internal organization, depending on what you're looking for and what the situation is and what you think the future is going to be, of course. Because you've got to do some prediction if you're going to make a change.
And this is Singapore's approach.
Yeah, this one, start small, think big, and scale fast. And if you could do it, boy, it's great. but you got to have the right culture to do it.
With the planned in scalability, and that takes the flexibility, the agility.
Right. Now, many people like to start big, act quickly, and demand change in results. And of course, when you demand anything, you're going against people's nature, and you've got a bigger problem than what you had before you started. Typically, not always. Now, when you change the organization, here's just three ideas to think about. Order and enforce, that's the classic way, which was the 50s and 60s and all the way back in history for many organizations, not all. Create islands of change and build upon them. That's kind of what we talked about before. And leading involves backing. Leadership involvement backing. You've got to have that. Now, what we were hoping to do,
This time,
you got 15 minutes. You can use the world in that.
20.
Think about this. Let's say you've got some organizational problem. Okay, now, and you're asked to develop a decision strategy. And ask yourself, in this decision strategy, what would the role of social networking be? See, now we're pulling some knowledge management stuff in and say, okay, how could this aspect of knowledge management help change the organization or get me where I want to go? And that will not only let you think about the strategy itself, but it'll also think about the value and the application of social networking. Again, if you have to sell people on knowledge management, and we all almost have to all the time if they're not familiar with it, you've got to go back to that performance relationship with knowledge, if you will, the recognition of sharing information versus sharing knowledge, and here the support that the various categories or parts of knowledge management can provide in improving the organization. What's the role of knowledge and knowledge management in the decision strategy? Many organizations, for example, consulting organizations, are knowledge-driven, knowledge-centric. The military, the Navy, became knowledge-centric as best it could. They did a very good job of it. That is, knowledge is a significant part of the organization, and people are aware of it and recognize its importance.
So without further ado, culture, learning, leadership, mid-level managers, communities of practice, or any other element that's interconnected with knowledge management, just pick one or two if you want. And if you, at the table you're at, would just turn together and someone identify an issue you're having in an organization, working around and help, and then brainstorm just a little bit, one or two elements. How could anything that we've learned today help anything, knowledge and knowledge management, what is the role of social networking? Ask yourself some of the difficult questions and see if you can start framing a little strategy of how you're going to respond, the decision strategy for that issue. Okay? Pretty clear?
Any questions?
So, what the four of you work together just at your table?
Each table could work on itself.
Clear, but you
Sorry. Okay, great, okay.
The only thing I would add is the characterization of a knowledge champion, in my view, on the strategies would also involve stewardship.
Absolutely.
Which is that's my key word coming from my background. So the stewardship and responsibility factor of knowledge, the knowledge chain and where you're at in that as an employee, as a participant. There's a levy there that puts the onus on them as a participatory agent, that they have responsibility in the chain of knowledge.
Yes.
So.
Yes. And the other part of the WIFM, which we didn't go into big, is the flow via Six and Hyde, which is the concept of autotelic work, so that you come from within and you push yourself a little bit further. And that's the excitement, the self-excitement, the energy that is generated to succeed. Don't forget your evaluations. Yeah. Thank you.
Wrong time since you